Hey guys, this video is about prospecting, and we are going to show you what interesting things we were able to get out of the bowels of the earth. We chose 3 extremely interesting locations and spent almost 3 weeks on them, and all because one of the search sites is 1,000 kilometers away from us. We have ancient maps overlaid on a Google map. We can go back in time and find the location of villages, roads, mills, factories that were not spared by time. And we're going to start with a place that's about 80 years old, but it can only be reached on foot via a suspension bridge. It would take hours to get around by car. During the Second World War, fierce battles were fought here. Now the trenches are well marked. They are certainly washed away after so many years, but the general structure is visible. Now the depth is not more than half a meter, although 80 years ago it was 2 meters. Despite the fact that the terrain is steppe, even a tree has managed to sprout in one of the trenches. There are stones here. They must have had some function, otherwise they wouldn't have been laid in such even rows. Now we will show the general system of trenches from a bird's eye view. There are a lot of them here, and they are spread over a large area. The site of the transfer is quite large. In 1943, German troops held the defense here under the Soviet attack. And in 1944, they had to retreat and abandon their fortified redoubts. From history to search. Literally in 5 minutes, the metal detector signaled that we should dig here. Once convinced, the first find was dug. We took a pinpointer and searched for our treasure in a pile of earth. Our find turned out to be a small piece of iron, either from a shell or from armor. Who does not know that a pinpointer is a metal pointer, which makes the process of searching much easier. We didn't have time to go 10 meters before we found something in the ground again. This place is really rich in military artifacts. Oddly enough, it was again an artillery or aircraft fragment. In fact, we found a huge amount of splinters that day. We can say that 90% of what we found were fragments. This shows that the fighting here was fierce. There were so many fragments that we are not going to show them, but we are going to go to the most interesting finds. Strangely enough, the first discovery worthy of attention was also the largest of our finds. We had to dig a big hole for it. Frankly, it was even a little scared, and suddenly it is an unexploded shell. When we took it out of the ground, it turned out to be a shell casing from an old shell that was well preserved. Probably because it is made of non-ferrous metal. Surprisingly, there was very little soil inside. It's not an unimportant point that we bury every hole after us. After we leave, everything will be as it was before we came. We also unearthed a strange larva here. Their grandfathers, and then their grandfathers, must have guarded this relic for generations. But here, everything was against us. First, the ground was so compacted that the shovel wouldn't go in. Then it turned out that this place was guarded by ants. Okay, sorry guys, we're leaving. Then it turns out that we're not the only ones digging here. There's also a gopher, but he was digging in the wrong place. Just a few meters away from his hole, we found a rusty shell casing. I guess the metal quality here is worse than a big artillery shell casing. And in general, shell casings like this have become the second most popular find. And here we come to the most. First, a ring was found near the stone. I even had to hit it with a shovel a few times. The dwarf would not give it back. Unfortunately, the ring is not made of silver, but it is well preserved, with the inscriptions SS and 12 Panzer Division. The next find we could not immediately identify when we broke it out of the ground. It has the eagle of the Third Reich on it, the inscription NSDAP. You can't see it very well here, but it looks like a knight's helmet. This thing is a paperclip, probably for some valuable documents of the time. So it definitely belonged to an officer. And since it's made of bronze, it's well preserved. In addition to the fired cartridges, we found a whole live 7.92 caliber round in very good condition for a German Mauser rifle. And perhaps the most valuable find was literally on the surface. A fork used by a German soldier 80 years ago. It feels like we've touched history. And here they are, all our finds. By the way, according to the inscription on the fork, it was meant for officers, not common soldiers. There's everything from a giant shell casing to a 12th Armored Division ring, from a paperclip to aircraft shrapnel. Only half of the iron fragments fit on this rock, and a whole bunch of them were left in the backpack. But all the shell casings were laid out. These are quite interesting finds. In general, the first site pleased us with its abundance of interesting historical artifacts from the Second World War. Let's go to the next one. The next place of search will be an old road. It went through the forest, along the river, fields, old villages that have long since disappeared. Partly this road is preserved as it was 20 years ago, only it is already paved with asphalt, partly rebuilt, and where it passed is now a plowed field. The part that went through the forest is overgrown with trees beyond recognition. If we didn't have an old map, we wouldn't have known it was here. It's the forest part of the road that we're most interested in. Perhaps it was once attacked by brigands, and something even fell to an earth dwarf, so we don't hesitate to enter the forest. Of course, it is very overgrown, but that does not stop us at all. So we slowly make our way to the place where the highway passed. According to the map, we are now on the road. As I go, so goes the road. Let's start looking. And the first interesting find, which in our opinion really has something to do with the old days, was an iron horseshoe. At first, we thought it was a donkey shoe, but on closer examination, we decided that it was a heel plate. This means that we are on the right track and we are really following the trail of the road. Not all the finds were interesting, quite the opposite, but we are not going to waste your time and show you what really has historical significance. For example, we did not immediately think to include this thing in the selection, but we were interested in the fact that the holes in it were not drilled, but punched. You can see how the metal was wrapped up. Looks like this part fell off the old wagon. Let's keep looking for the artifacts the Earth Dwarf has hidden for us. He's quite the builder. He gave us an ancient wrought iron nail. The funny thing is that this nail isn't round. It's slightly flattened. For a long time, we walked through the forest, or rather along the former road, and the most common find here were metal fragments. Most likely, it's a legacy of the Second World War. There are a lot of them here. We found the same ones in the previous place. Also, where the road used to be is now a plowed field. It is much harder to move around here than in the forest, but we tried. We tried and we were rewarded for our efforts, which was valued at 3 kopecks from 1896. Of course, the coin has no collector's value. First of all, it is very worn, but it is still very interesting to find something that you can be sure was used 100 years ago. Moving on, we had to drive 1,000 kilometers to the next location. We're very excited about this location. According to our information, on both banks of this river, there was a village more than 100 years ago, which then belonged to Austria-Hungary. and now it is the territory of Ukraine. During the First World War, it was completely destroyed, and the next settlements were built far away from this place. Now there is no trace of the village, even if you look at the area from the bird's eye view. However, if you look closely, even on the dirt road, you can see that it passes through the site of the ancient construction. You can clearly see the boundary between the ordinary earth and the remains of building materials. Nearby, among the stones protruding from the ground, we found the remains of tiles. It is difficult to say that this is the Austro-Hungarian period, but I want to believe. Also nearby, I found confirmation that we were on the right track. A piece of building material sticking out of the ground turned out to be an old brick with Latin letters on it. The brick factories of that time marked their products, but we were looking for Austria. We found Albania. And the first metal found was an old forged nail. I guess building materials were scarce back then. If a nail is an interesting find. Because there was a lot of uninteresting garbage found here. We won't drag out the video and show every little thing. Moreover, we spent 2 days here and walked many kilometers. If we would show every little thing, the video would be 1 hour long. Another interesting find was waiting for us between the trees. Here we already dug up the find. We identified the stone and broke it into 3 pieces. The pinpointer is discharged. Now we reject the unnecessary by passing it over the coil of the metal detector. Our find was a medic's badge. Its owner probably helped soldiers during the First World War. While removing the badge from the ground, we chipped off the oxide layer in one corner. Now we can see that the material is copper, and the ruins next to it are probably an infirmary. We're certainly not the first to play archaeologist. You can clearly see that this place has been excavated, especially if you look through the eyes of a quadricopter. And here's the first find, confirming that Austrian troops were here. It's hard to dig in this area, there's nothing but rocks underfoot. But among the stones was found a leather belt, which is well preserved, but it doesn't set off the metal detector. Let's keep looking. We found a belt buckle with an Austrian eagle. On the camera, it is hard to see, but even in the ground a print remained. We also dug up an old rusty door curtain nearby. It may not be a curtain, but we couldn't think of any other use for it. And now for our biggest silver find of all time. Again between the rocks. Only this time we found an Austrian silver coin, a Mark 1895. It's not a collector's item, but the emotion of such a find is worth it. Another coin find, 2 Austrian pennies. Copper, unlike silver, is much worse preserved underground. The corrosion is very strong, so much so that one side of the copper is gone, and the find itself is from 1800. I don't know what year. Let's move on. At the new location, there were even more shingles. Maybe it's the locals bringing their construction waste here. But even in such an area, another badge was found. It looks like a Hungarian coat of arms. Well, guys, our search efforts have yielded some interesting finds, and hopefully an interesting video, which you will appreciate by liking it. That's all for now. Bye-bye.